Racist cop releases dog on black man. Not knowing he's the police commissioner, a traffic stop escalates when an officer's actions cross the line. The man at the center of the conflict, however, isn't who he seems, and the fallout will be unforgettable. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. Elijah Brown sits behind the wheel of his black sedan, his grip tight on the steering wheel as he navigates the morning traffic toward the police headquarters. His mind drifts to 20 years ago, his father being dragged away in handcuffs while young Elijah watched from the window. The evidence had been planted, but it took 5 years to prove it. By then, his father's health had deteriorated in prison beyond recovery. Now, as police commissioner, Elijah carries the weight of reform on his shoulders. His office walls display his achievements: Harvard Law degree, FBI training certifications, and numerous commendations. But these accolades feel hollow when he reads the weekly reports of racial profiling incidents across his precincts. Across town, Officer Chris Allen receives praise in the morning briefing room. Another drug bust, clean takedown, his sergeant announces. His colleagues pat his back, but Chris feels uneasy. Yesterday's arrest involved excessive force, something the report conveniently omitted. The suspect had already surrendered when Chris's partner threw him against the wall. Chris glances at the photos on his desk. His daughter Sarah at her high school graduation, now a sophomore in college. Her latest text message still burns in his mind. "Dad, how can you be part of this system?" She's been attending police brutality protests, holding signs that make him question everything he's defended for 15 years on the force. During his patrol, Chris responds to a domestic disturbance call. The situation calls for de-escalation. A frightened teenager, a stressed parent, mounting tensions. His hand hovers over his weapon, muscle memory from years of training. But Sarah's words echo in his head. Instead, he takes a deep breath and starts talking. The situation resolves peacefully, but his partner calls him soft afterward. Later that evening, Chris watches a live stream on his phone. Sarah stands among protesters, chanting "No justice, no peace." Her passion reminds him of himself at her age, when he first joined the academy with dreams of making a difference. Now, at 43, the line between right and wrong has become increasingly blurred. Back at headquarters, Elijah reviews the latest community complaints. Each file represents another crack in public trust, another family traumatized by those sworn to protect them. His secretary interrupts. There's another protest planned for tomorrow. The organizers expect thousands. Chris ends his shift with paperwork, documenting the domestic call. His partner's version differs significantly from what happened, painting a more aggressive picture of the teenager. Chris stares at his computer screen, cursor blinking over the submit button. Down the hall, other officers laugh and joke about their exciting takedowns of the day. Sarah calls while Chris drives home. "Dad, you need to see what's happening out here. These aren't just angry people. They're mothers, fathers, students, teachers. They're afraid of the people who should be protecting them." Chris parks his patrol car and closes his eyes, thinking of all the times he stayed silent when he should have spoken up. Elijah's day ends with a community meeting. Local leaders express their frustration with the lack of progress in police reform. One mother shows pictures of her son's bruised face after a routine traffic stop. Elijah recognizes the officers involved. They've had multiple complaints, but the union protects them. As night falls, both men lie awake in their respective homes. Elijah plans his next policy proposal, knowing it will face resistance from the old guard. Chris stares at his ceiling, Sarah's words mixing with the day's events in his mind. Neither man knows that tomorrow their paths will cross in a confrontation that will force both to take stands they never imagined. The city sleeps uneasily, protest signs ready in cars and basements, body cameras charging in police lockers, and the tension builds toward a breaking point that will test everyone's convictions about justice, duty, and change. The morning sun beats down on a quiet suburban street as Elijah Brown drives his unmarked black sedan. He's running late for a meeting about police reform. Ironic given what's about to unfold. His phone buzzes with messages about budget allocations and community complaints, but he follows protocol and leaves it untouched. Officer Chris Allen patrols the same street. His police dog Rex restless in the back. The radio crackles with reports of a suspicious vehicle matching Elijah's car description. The caller mentioned a threatening-looking man. Code words Chris has heard too many times before. He spots the black sedan and flips on his lights. Elijah pulls over immediately, muscle memory from years of experiencing these stops, even before becoming commissioner. He places his hands on the steering wheel, visible. Through his rearview mirror, he watches Chris approach with Rex straining at the leash. Something in the officer's stance sets off warning bells. Chris sees a black man in an expensive car. His training kicks in, but so do his biases. He orders Elijah to step out of the vehicle, his voice carrying that edge of authority he's perfected over years. When Elijah calmly asks why he's being stopped, Chris interprets the question as defiance. The situation escalates in seconds. Chris, feeling challenged, releases Rex while shouting commands. The dog charges toward Elijah's car as bystanders pull out their phones, recording everything. Elijah remains still, his heart pounding but his face composed. Years of experience teaching him that any sudden movement could be fatal. A crowd gathers as Rex barks aggressively at Elijah's window. Someone recognizes him. That's Commissioner Brown. The whisper spreads through the onlookers like wildfire. Chris feels the blood drain from his face as he realizes his mistake, but it's too late to call Rex back without losing face. Elijah slowly reaches for his badge, announcing each movement. "Officer, I'm Police Commissioner Elijah Brown. I'm going to show you my identification." His voice carries the weight of authority, but also exhaustion, the kind that comes from experiencing this scenario countless times before. The video spreads faster than either man can process what's happening. Within hours, #Commissioner Brown trends on social media. The footage shows everything: the unnecessary escalation, the racial profiling, the use of force against an unarmed, compliant citizen who happens to be the city's top law enforcement official. Protesters gather outside police headquarters. Signs reading, "Even the commissioner isn't safe," and "Who polices the police?" fill the air. News vans line the streets, reporters clamoring for statements from both men. Chris sits in the precinct break room, watching the footage replay on every channel. His colleagues avoid eye contact. His phone buzzes. Sarah has seen the video. Her message is simple. "Now do you understand, Dad?" Elijah addresses the press from his office, his words measured but firm. "What happened today is not unique. I'm just fortunate enough to have the platform to speak about it. This stops now." The live feed captures every word, every controlled expression that masks decades of similar experiences. The city erupts in debate. Police unions release statements defending Chris's actions as protocol, while civil rights organizations demand immediate action. Social media explodes with similar stories from citizens who lacked Elijah's position and power to fight back. As night falls, both men face scrutiny from different directions. Elijah fields calls from the mayor, civil rights leaders, and his family. Chris receives messages from fellow officers, some supportive, others distancing themselves from the impending storm. Neither man sleeps, knowing tomorrow will bring consequences neither fully anticipated. Ana Martinez stands at the podium, her voice steady despite the chaos of camera flashes and shouting reporters. As a respected community organizer who's spent 15 years fighting police brutality, she knows this moment is crucial. What happened to Commissioner Brown isn't an isolated incident, she declares. It's a symptom of systematic racism that persists even when the victim holds the highest position in our police force. If our commissioner isn't safe from racial profiling, who is? The press conference transforms into a rally. Anna's words resonate with the gathered crowd, many holding smartphones that broadcasted her speech live. She outlines specific demands: mandatory bias training, civilian oversight boards, and immediate suspension of Officer Allen pending investigation. Later that evening, Elijah meets Anna at a community center in the heart of the city's predominantly black neighborhood. The building buzzes with activity. Volunteers coordinate protest schedules, legal observers receive training, and community members share their own stories of police encounters. "Commissioner," Anna says privately, This incident gives us leverage we've never had before. But we need to move fast before they try to bury it. She shows him social media posts of other officers defending Chris, attempting to reframe the narrative as a simple misunderstanding. Elijah nods, remembering similar misunderstandings throughout his career. "We need to be strategic," he responds. "Push too hard, and the union circles the wagons. Not hard enough, and nothing changes." They discuss ways to channel the public outrage into meaningful reform. Across town, Chris sits at his kitchen table, facing his daughter Sarah. The remains of an untouched dinner lie between them. "You can't justify this one, Dad," she says, her voice trembling with anger and disappointment. "I saw the video. Everyone saw it. He announced himself, showed his badge, and you still." "I followed procedure," Chris interrupts, but the words sound hollow even to him. Sarah pulls out her phone, showing him comments from her friends, news articles, and viral posts analyzing every second of the incident. "Procedure," she scoffs. "Since when does procedure require threatening an unarmed man with a police dog?" The argument escalates. Sarah reveals she's organizing a protest for tomorrow. Chris realizes with growing dread that his daughter will be standing against everything he's represented for 15 years. When she leaves, slamming the door behind her, Chris pours himself a drink and stares at his police badge on the counter. Back at the community center, Anna and Elijah finalize plans for tomorrow's demonstration. They've secured permits, coordinated with peaceful protest organizers, and arranged for legal observers. "This isn't just about you anymore," Anna tells him. "You've become a symbol." Elijah understands the weight of this role. His position as commissioner makes this incident impossible to ignore or dismiss. Yet he knows from experience how the system resists change, how it protects its own. He shares this concern with Anna, who's seen countless cases vanish into the bureaucratic maze of internal affairs. "Then we make it impossible for them to look away," she responds, showing him the growing list of community members willing to testify about their own experiences. "Your incident broke the dam. People are finally ready to speak up." The night ends with both Anna and Elijah exhausted but determined. Tomorrow's protest will test the city's commitment to change, and neither can afford to fail. Meanwhile, Chris lies awake, his daughters, words echoing in his mind, finally beginning to understand the true cost of blind loyalty to a flawed system. The police department's Internal Affairs Division launches its investigation reluctantly. Marcus Thompson, a young black investigator, reviews the body cam footage in his cramped office. The video shows clear inconsistencies between Chris's report and reality. During interviews, officers close ranks. They describe Chris as an exemplary officer, minimizing the incident. Marcus notices key details being omitted, witness statements altered, and evidence being mishandled. His superior, Captain Rogers, suggests wrapping this up quickly to maintain department morale. Marcus arranges a discreet meeting with Elijah at a diner far from headquarters. "They're burying it, sir," he reports, sliding a manila envelope across the table. Changed timestamps on the body cam footage, altered witness statements, even tried to claim the dog was responding to a perceived threat. Elijah reviews the documents, his jaw tightening. The corruption runs deeper than expected. Marcus risks his career by sharing this information, but his conscience won't let him participate in the cover-up. Chris faces mounting pressure from fellow officers. His union representative coaches him on his statement, suggesting language that frames Elijah as the aggressor. "Just say you felt threatened," the rep advises. "It's worked before." But the evidence haunts Chris. His body cam clearly shows Elijah's calm demeanor, his clear identification as commissioner. The dog's release wasn't necessary. It was instinct, bias, and years of ingrained responses. During his official interview, Chris stumbles through the prepared statement. Marcus catches the inconsistencies, pressing harder. "Officer Allen, if Commissioner Brown identified himself, why did you proceed with escalation?" The question hangs in the air. Chris's union rep attempts to intervene, but Chris raises his hand. For the first time, he faces the truth of his actions. His voice shakes as he admits, "I acted on assumptions. I saw what I expected to see." Marcus documents everything, building a case that can't be ignored. He knows the risks. Officers who cross the blue line often find themselves isolated, their careers stalled. But watching the system protect itself at the expense of justice becomes unbearable. Back in his office, Elijah reviews Marcus's findings. The pattern is familiar, the same tactics used to justify countless other incidents. But this time, they have insider evidence of the cover-up itself. Mark Chun, an investigative journalist and Elijah's childhood friend, publishes a detailed expose in the city's major newspaper. The article reveals systematic corruption within the police department, using the incident with Chris as a starting point. The story features interviews with former officers who confirm a culture of racial profiling and evidence tampering. Body camera footage from previous incidents shows a pattern of excessive force against minorities. Internal memos expose how complaints were routinely dismissed or buried. Public reaction is immediate. Social media explodes with stories from other victims. A delivery driver shares dashcam footage of a similar incident. A teacher describes being threatened with a police dog during a routine traffic stop. A businessman recalls being forced to lie face down on the pavement outside his own office. Sarah organizes a social media campaign sharing these stories. Her posts go viral, creating a timeline of police abuse spanning decades. Chris watches his daughter's activism with growing unease, recognizing some of the incidents she documents. Elijah faces intense media scrutiny. Every news channel wants an interview, but he chooses his appearances carefully. On a national morning show, he says, "My position protected me. Most victims don't have that privilege." The police union responds aggressively, calling the article a witch hunt and threatening. In legal action, they pressure officers to discredit victim stories. But more evidence emerges: leaked emails, surveillance footage, internal reports showing systematic bias. Chris observes his colleagues' reactions. Some officers he respected make racist comments about the victims. Others justify clearly excessive force. He starts recording conversations, documenting the department's response to the scandal. The mayor calls an emergency press conference, promising a thorough investigation. But leaked documents show her office knew about these issues for years. Public trust erodes further as each new revelation exposes deeper corruption. Elijah organizes a town hall meeting where citizens share their experiences of police misconduct. The stories paint a devastating picture. A mother whose son was wrongfully arrested, a businessman repeatedly stopped outside his own store, a teenager traumatized by an aggressive police dog. Chris attends anonymously, sitting in the back. Each testimony strikes him differently now. He recognizes tactics he's used, justifications he's made. His daughter's voice rings out clear when she takes the microphone, describing how her father's involvement in the system affected their family. The meeting transforms into an impromptu forum for change. Community members propose concrete reforms: civilian oversight boards, mandatory de-escalation training, body camera accountability. Elijah takes notes, building a comprehensive reform proposal. Chris finally approaches his daughter afterward. Their conversation is raw but necessary. "I've been part of the problem," he admits. Sarah listens as her father describes the gradual normalization of excessive force, the subtle ways bias infiltrated daily decisions. Meanwhile, Elijah confronts the police leadership about the systematic cover-ups. The meeting is tense. Senior officers defend the status quo, but Elijah presents irrefutable evidence of misconduct. "This ends now," he declares, "or I take everything public." Back in his office, Elijah reviews police training protocols, identifying points where bias enters the system. He begins drafting new procedures, incorporating community input and modern de-escalation techniques. The city square fills with thousands of protesters. Police barricades create a tense perimeter. Chris, in riot gear, stands with his unit, facing crowds that include his daughter Sarah among the front lines. Elijah and Anna address the crowd. "Today we demand more than promises," Anna declares. "We need systemic change." Elijah outlines specific reforms: independent oversight, body camera requirements, de-escalation training. Chris watches the peaceful demonstration, remembering his own idealistic days at the academy. His radio crackles with orders to disperse the crowd. He hesitates, seeing Sarah link arms with other protesters. The turning point comes when an aggressive officer pushes a teenage protester. Chris steps forward, removing his riot helmet. "Stand down," he orders his colleague. The crowd falls silent as Chris crosses the police line to join the protesters. His action triggers a ripple effect. Other officers, inspired by his courage, lower their shields. The moment is captured on countless phones, becoming a symbol of possible change. Public pressure mounts as media coverage of Chris's defection goes viral. More officers come forward with evidence of departmental misconduct. Internal affairs investigations reveal widespread corruption at senior levels. Elijah and Anna capitalize on the momentum, organizing community forums to draft reform proposals. Chris provides insider testimony about systemic racism within the force, detailing specific incidents and naming involved officers. The police union attempts damage control, but leaked documents support the reformers' claims. Multiple officers face suspension pending investigation. The mayor, under pressure, creates a civilian oversight committee. Elijah introduces comprehensive reform legislation, mandatory bias training, stricter body camera protocols, and community-based policing initiatives. The proposal gains support from both community leaders and progressive officers. The leaked recording of Chris's earlier comments about using force devastates the reform movement. In it, he callously justifies aggressive tactics against minorities, contradicting his recent stance as an ally. Protesters gather outside police headquarters. Sarah confronts her father publicly. "Was your change of heart just an act?" The trust Chris built crumbles as activists label him a double agent. Elijah faces mounting pressure to distance himself from Chris. Instead, he calls for patience, recognizing the complexity of personal transformation. At a press conference, he addresses the recording. "Change isn't instant. What matters is who we choose to become." A senior officer's confession reveals he doctored Chris's recording to discredit the reform movement. Security footage shows him splicing together old conversations to create the inflammatory content. Chris, vindicated, releases his extensive documentation of departmental corruption. His evidence, combined with Marcus's internal affairs findings, forces the resignation of several high-ranking officers. The final scene unfolds at a community oversight board meeting. Elijah announces sweeping reforms, mandatory bias training, civilian review panels, and a new division focused on community policing, led jointly by him and Chris. Sarah joins as a community liaison, bridging the gap between police and protesters. The story ends with both men addressing a new class of police cadets, emphasizing accountability, community trust, and the courage to challenge systemic injustice. The incident that brought them together becomes a case study in police reform training nationwide.